Okay, Rebecca, here we are on my new machine. Unfamiliar messages. This conversation has been recorded and stop babbling, Andrew. Silence is what we're talking about, and that silence is something you don't hear from me very often. We might go into that, but I shall try and be silent while you set the scene for us, because you brought me the whole idea of silence as a tool through the thinking environment stuff. So I will be silent and listen to what you got to say that's profound on this matter.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, so silence is not actually one of the 10 components of a thinking environment, but it's very much explicit within that in terms of and I love the premise around it. Is just because somebody's silent doesn't mean they are not thinking. It doesn't mean that they're finished. It doesn't mean that their mind's not busy. Often it's just an internal dialogue that's going on. So that's an interesting thing, isn't it? Although we're externally silent, perhaps we're not internally silent, which I've not thought about before. But it's one of those things that people often feel very uncomfortable with. And I think that's something worth us exploring and helping people to get more comfortable with silence and perhaps thinking about why people are uncomfortable with that silence. But it's very rare to have complete silence these days, I think.
Well, you know what I'm doing. The trouble is, you can parody this when there's real deeply significant issues here. Because when I started digging into the whole silence thing, when we agreed to do this recording last week, I was surprised and very pleased to see there's so much out there on it. TED Talks on it, a lot of podcasty stuff. This is a topic people talk about, ironically, can't do it telepathically, which suggests to me that it's important, and it's gone under my radar again. I mean, 42 years in the learning business is another one. I think, oh, I should have picked up on silence years ago. And you're right. Silence isn't just about keeping quiet. It's about creating an active, reflective space.
It's not. I mean, you can have awkward silences, which is where people feel very uncomfortable and think, right, should I speak? Is the other person going to speak next? But actually sometimes just getting used to that and sitting with silence can be really helpful, because it does allow that and like you said, it is an active thing. It's not just sort of sitting there waiting for somebody else to speak. It is that active, conscious choice to stay quiet in that moment. And I think that's the important thing, isn't it? It is a silence, I think, has to be a conscious decision.
Yeah, because it seems to be an unconscious decision to talk and to fill space.
And that's the temptation with people, isn't it? If they don't like that silence, so somebody feels that they have to say something and they have to butt in. And it's interesting when you watch presenters or teachers or people doing that sort of thing, those who are very confident in themselves will allow that silence to grow. When you get people who are a bit nervous about that and are uncomfortable with silence, they will leave it maybe a few seconds, which they feel like is a minute or 2 minutes, and then jump in without actually encouraging. I think the longer we leave the silence, it encourages other people to think more. Sometimes we ask a question, give it a few seconds, nobody's answered, and therefore we jump in and answer the question ourselves. But then that doesn't allow for that doesn't give people the time to think. I think sometimes, especially if you've asked them a deep question, you have to give people that space to think it through. They're not going to be able to answer quickly, or if they do, it's not necessarily a well thought out answer. So being confident in knowing that silence isn't a bad thing, and you're giving people the space they need to form thoughts and answers to questions.
Yeah, and it is wrapped up with things like interruptions, not even waiting for someone to finish in order to give silence, but interrupting them before they even ended what they're saying. And I've been thinking and making notes, as I always need to, because my brain is a sieve. And it seems to me there's a lot of different types of silence. You mentioned a few there. There's like solo silence, when you consciously, deliberately reflect on your own. There's transactional silence, I'll call it, in conversation, when you might say, give me just 10 seconds. I want to think about what you've said. I ask people in conversation if they've ever heard that. No. And yet, isn't that what we should do more often? To say, hey, you've just given me something big there. I need to unpack that in my head. I might need to go away and come back to you on it because it's that big, but maybe just 10 seconds or so if I can be quiet. I do that on the phone quite a bit to say, okay, I want to think about that. And then I think it's respectful. So there's solo silence, there's transactional silence, there's the really hard one for me, and that's group silence. In a meeting of people who are shouting at each other, for someone to have the courage to say, hey, can we just be quiet for 30 seconds? I won't make it a minute because that sounds painful. 30 seconds. I'll just thinking about what we've been saying here, because behind the noise, there's probably a better answer, a better solution than the noisy first ones we're coming up with. And my feeling is, Rebecca, if someone who ran a meeting was, or anyone in it, was brave enough to say, let's take 30 seconds, what would you see? You'd see people reaching for their phone to try and do something that they perceive to be more valuable than sitting there being quiet for half a minute.
There's a couple of things that struck me when you were talking there, is actually being intentional about the purpose of the silence. So you've just said that when you speak to people over the phone, you let them know that, just give me 10 seconds to think about it, or some time to think about it. So you're giving the other person information about what you're doing. So hopefully then that reduces the awkwardness. And the same in a meeting as well. I think actually saying to people, so rather than hopefully by giving that instruction, saying, right, let's just take some time to ponder on this, it reduces the pressure and people thinking, oh my God, somebody just speak. You don't have to grab your phone or whatever it is. You're given that space, and perhaps that's something that we can encourage people to do, is to use silence, but to be purposeful about that silence and let other people know why we're using that silence as well, rather than just suddenly, that's it, zipping your mouth and sitting there, which is, potentially awkward because people, like you say, we're so used to filling that gap that it does become awkward. So if we understood what was going on and why we were doing it, perhaps it would be easier. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it needs to be managed. This makes it sound like a big thing, but I think to get value from silence, and we're not talking about taking out 8 minutes. If you're giving a few seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds will seem like an age in a meeting of people, then as you say, I think you've got to be very clear about why you're doing it and the outcomes you're seeking from it. Better analysis, better ideas than we just go bang, bang, bang. I noticed that more and more that football crowds are less often giving a minute silence. It's now minutes applause. And I think that's for a reason.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it, that we don't like that. But you got me thinking, obviously, I love the outdoors, I love going walking. And for me, I enjoy, that's a different type of silence again. For me, I love that, because when I'm silent and not talking, so sometimes I will encourage people on my walk to just be silent and quiet for a few minutes or a particular stretch, because that's when you then tune into other sounds, such as the birds or the wind in the trees or whatever it might be, different animal sounds, and it allows you to tune in a different way, and you hear far more when you're quiet. I know some people like to have earphones in and listen to things when they're walking. That's not for me. I go outside because I want to engage in my surroundings. I want to hear what's going on in my surroundings when I'm out in nature. So yes, there is and that's when I do notice that my ideas come to me when I'm outdoors and I am quiet in nature.
And in motion.
Yeah, and in motion and moving around and stuff. So it's a different experience, isn't it? When we're quiet, we hear more as well. I think that's part of the thing as well.
Yeah, this all sounds very profound and to a degree Buddhist. And when I was researching this, I saw quite a few little videos about Buddha and this sort of stuff. And you're left wondering, yeah, really or not? And I don't know. But hey, who cares where good ideas come from? And I shouldn't really be questioning that, because there's enough people that know about it more than I that perceive substance to it. So I'm not going to get religious on us here, but silence has been talked about thousands of years, and the value of it by now should be known. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. And when I drive less often distances now than I used to, very deliberately. I would often drive back from Scotland 7 hours sometimes without the radio or anything else on. To think 7 hours in the car thinking. And there were times that didn't happen, but sometimes I would take the whole 7 hours because it's 7 hours I hadn't had in the last month any other time than being alone in a car with the option of that. So I think part of it is the perceived value of this driving the will to find that space.
Yeah, and that I get that completely. I've done that a few times when I've been driving back from somewhere. I haven't had the radio on because I think we live in such a busy environment that is constantly noisy in one way or another, either people talking to us or messages coming through or different media coming through, and it's constantly busy. So actually just sitting or being in silence is a pleasure.
Yeah.
And it gives you that space to process. I think that's the thing when we're constantly bombarded by noises or words or things going on, our brains don't have the time to process stuff. So actually, there's so many benefits, you're right, to sitting in silence for a little while. And yeah, it's sometimes it's really pleasurable. I met a lady last week actually who was going on a silent retreat, a weekend silent retreat, where they would be in silence. She did say there would be a couple of talks where people would be talking at the participants, but they were not encouraged to talk. So she was looking forward to that, and slightly apprehensive at the same time.
Yeah, and ironically, we talk about silence, and I know you've got dogs in the house at the moment, so there's some deep irony there, and there's I suppose there's absolute silence where you literally exclude all sound. I think we're really talking about creating reflective space. It doesn't have to be sterile completely, but this unfamiliarity thing, let's hit on it. I've been bringing this topic up, the use of silence as a tool, as an interpersonal tool, with a client organization that I'm working with worldwide in 4 different continents, different time zones. Hey, aren't I important? Not really, just the nature of the work I do at the moment, and different cultures. Do Chinese people find it more acceptable than German people? Do people in Gothenburg find it less alien than America? And that's interesting. I'm putting it to all of them, and some of them are saying, "Whoa, we couldn't do that," and others. And in one meeting, because we have group meetings and one-to-one coaching sessions, in one meeting, someone said, "Let's try it now, Andrew." This is a meeting of 3 people, one in China, one in Germany, and one in the Czech Republic. And he said, Andrew, let's try it now for 1 minute. I said, yeah, let's do it. And we did in the meeting spontaneously. After 10 seconds, the lady from Czech Republic said, this is going to be a long minute.
Yeah. And I wonder what it is that people are fearful of, why we fear silence. Because I think that's it. It becomes, some people are fearful of it because it feels uncomfortable, but what makes it feel so uncomfortable to have silence? That's an interesting thing, I think.
The fear, oh, that's interesting. And this isn't rehearsed, everybody. We generally never know what we're going to say. I didn't expect you to say, why do people fear silence? Because I think they do. They, the human race, they, some people, not all, me. I think there is a fear of silence. I'd go that far as to use that word.
Yeah, which I've not thought about. That's just come to me now as you were saying that, because I think that's why people want to jump in, because it feels really uncomfortable to do that. But I think let's encourage people to have a go at some point today to just find a minute and see how long it feels for a minute. Because sometimes when your mind, this is the thing in coaching, when you allow your client some space to think, you know, a minute to you as a coach may feel quite a long time, but for the person that we're coaching, a minute goes, and they think, wow, hang on a minute, I'm still thinking here, I'm still processing. So time distorts as well, doesn't it, for people? That's the other thing. So I genuinely encourage people to just take some time out to be silent, whether it's in a meeting or whether it's for yourself, turn the radio off, take your earbuds out, whatever it is, and just take some moments to be silent.
And then you watch people And some people will say, yeah, let's do that. And they're looking immediately at their screen. You can see the hands moving, or they've reached their phone. And you think, that's not what I'm encouraging you to do here. Silence is not about keeping quiet, like we said. Silence is purposeful, it's intentional, and it's a valuable active space, not a passive one where you just wait for time to elapse and get on with something more active.
Yeah. So I think that's the key, isn't it? Is decide what you want from, or what the purpose is of this silence.
I can't think of many situations or organizations or individuals where silence wouldn't add value. I'm probably talking about a minute at a time in long days. I mean, the people I work with show me their calendars and I say, you start at 7, you finish at 9 because you work across time zones. That's crazy, 14-hour days. In a 14-hour day, a number of 3, 4, 5 minutes can be found where you just sit there and say, nothing else. That's so hard to find.
It really shouldn't be, should it?
No. Nah, we're doing it. I just want to tell one brief story. You're in Sheffield. I was at Sheffield Poly, now very grandly called Sheffield Hallam University, when I was there between 78 and 92. I'm so old, I forget the years. When I was there in our first year, Dr. O'Neill gave us some reading to do. It was the first seminar with him. We all traipsed in to Pond Street, overlooking the old bus station. And he says, you all done the reading? Yeah, none of us had. And he says, that's good then, because I'd like to start with somebody saying what you thought of blah, blah, blah. And we looked at each other and say, who's going to say something here then? Because we know nobody's done this, because we established that outside the room, between the 8 of us. I timed it. 7 minutes. He sat there just looking at us, waiting. After 1 minute, we knew no one was going to say anything. How do you break a 1 minute silence? I thought to myself then, you've done this before, haven't you? After 7 minutes, he said, okay, 7 minutes is enough. Stop wasting my time. You know I'm going to ask you this another time. And anyone who hasn't done it will leave at that point. You can all go now. Be better prepared next time. I sat through a 7 minute silence. It stays with me to this day, 40 odd years later, more than 40 years later. It had that much impact.
And I imagine those 7 minutes felt a long time.
But he knew what he was doing. He'd done it before. He might have done it 3 times that week already. And it had impact. We did the reading afterwards because we knew he'd do it again.
Yeah, interesting.
So silence can be a deliberate tool, but it needs confidence. It needs clear, as you say, intentional outcomes. I'm talking myself into seeing this as a really valuable interpersonal tool.
Yeah, we used in many different ways, and it's very powerful. Definitely agree with that.
Okay, let's end that there. I'm already thinking, where can I go quietly in the back garden and sit for a few minutes and think about what's come out of this, because it deserves it. And I will look through the 8 so far. There's a load more out there, videos I've found over the weekend on silence, TED Talks and so on. They're really good. So as ever, thank you very much. Let's end it there.
Thank you.